Monday, February, what's today? The 18th, 17th,
17th.
2020. And we are recapping, Ruben, you can open this up. We're recapping last week's show where we had Daniel Mayer talking about non-conventional career paths in tech and recapping some key points that came out of that conversation. You can open that up and welcome my co-host today, Kim. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, Tulio. Interestingly enough, neither you or I were original participants in the recap show, or excuse me, in the original show, but here we are in the recap. But I think that's nice because it goes to hint that anybody can recap the show, right? If you've enjoyed one of the Dojo Live shows, if you would like to participate in the recap show, let us know.
Exactly. I'm thinking we should post the link to this video stream, and anybody who wants to join in can just chime in, and Ruben can let them in and out. We're going to experiment with that next week. We should totally do that. So there were 4 points that came out of the show last week, which sounded like a really good conversation, at least when I looked at it. And we broke them down into both employee areas of interest and employer areas of interest. And one of the things that stood out for me was this idea that as an employee, you shouldn't be afraid to forge a new career path. And if you discover, for example, gifts along the way that are not in alignment with your original path. I thought this was really interesting because we often feel like we've committed so many years to something, and it's like the longer I stay in it, the more success I will have. But it may not resonate with us anymore because we discovered, like, I'm really a great artist and I want to open a gallery. And what's the point of, giving up 30 years investing as a tech entrepreneur? Well, the point was, if you have a gift that you discover and it resonates with you and it feeds you, then you ought to reconsider your path, because ultimately it's about being happy, right? And doing something that is purposeful. Right. The other thing that stood out was this idea, really stood out for me actually, this idea that employers should encourage employees to pursue their own interests, right? I mean, there's, for example, if you are an engineer and you do have an interest in art and you do want to open a gallery, well, why should you have to make a choice between one or the other? And, what came out of the conversation that I think stood out is this idea that encouraging an employee to pursue that for themselves, whether it's a side hustle or what have you, isn't going to take away from their performance in the day-to-day work that they actually do. If anything, it makes them happier, more engaged, more loyal, and even increases their productivity. What do you think about that, Kim? Because that's sometimes contrary to popular belief that you've got to get 100% to everything you're doing, nothing else, or everything else is a distraction.
Right. I think it goes back, and I think Daniel hit on a couple points. And I think one of the first points that I appreciated going to this idea of forging our career paths is the conventional versus the non-conventional. And particularly when it comes to tech, he was highlighting this idea of, like, conventionally you have to go to kind of a tech kind of related school, and then you have to get this degree in software engineering, and then you have to try to work with the big dogs. And then there's the unconventional movement, which really resonated with me actually from what I hear and what I know happens here at Nearsoft, is that, sure, a fair number of our engineers have that conventional path, but a lot of them have the non-conventional path as well, where they come out of, we have a lot of our engineers who are physicists, who are, mechanical engineers, and somehow it was software that really resonated with them and became their passion. And so they took this non-conventional career path to wind up where they are now. And so I think it was interesting to talk about the conventional versus the non-conventional, and this idea of also what it means and what tech means. And I think it honed in on this responsibility of both the employee and the employer, which really spoke to me. And that was this idea, which sort of goes along with our own tagline, right? DojoLIVE, Tech Beyond Borders. He said something. He says, there's a paradox in tech in that there is a promise that technology is going to destroy borders, break down all the barriers, and that we're all going to work in this unified entity. And he said, I don't think that's actually played out. And he made this point that code is code, and you can basically write code anywhere, but there's these other external factors that come into play, right? Like, we may not be equally employed. We may not have the same opportunities, just given where we come from, our personal points in life, even equal access to electricity, right? And so what he talked about was this idea of us as tech companies, I think, and employees and employers, and how we can push this focus toward our both financial and moral obligations to help people who can contribute to contribute. And that goes back to, I think, our point number one is to how you can bring yourself to help others. And ultimately, I think that joy, that sense of purpose and meaningfulness in what we do is going to make us more holistic people as well as better employees. And if we have better employees, we have a better company, right? And it's just this chain reaction, right, of success all around. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the comment around the idea that you should invest as an employer in helping people fully develop themselves as human beings, right? So sometimes there's a tendency, how do I get you to become a better coder or a better employee to really just hone in on the skills that are needed. Basically, the mindset of, this is what I'm paying you for, so I want to get the maximum output from that. And that actually doesn't work really well in terms of taking a full interest in that person, because we are very multidimensional beings. We're not just, like a one-trick pony. This is all I do. And I found it refreshing to hear, and I think a lot of companies need to hear this, that it doesn't take away anything from an employee's performance point of view to actually help employees, fully develop themselves as human beings, whether it's developing skills, new talent, new skills, pursuing new interests. All these things are critically important. And I think companies that do that actually excel and have way lower attrition than companies who don't.
Right, and it goes a lot in line, I think, with a talk that we had a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago maybe, with Christy McCann, right? Her talk on a culture of learning and this idea of the willingness to be able to train people within to fill these new positions instead of getting rid of people and then hiring someone else in to fill that role. And I think it goes back to something that Daniel touched on, and he said, it's one of the simplest things, but also one of the most difficult things, I think, to achieve, and that's the need to care. As an employer, you have to care. And he said to recognize that you are more than the sum of what you are paid to do.
That's interesting. And that goes back also to the conversation with one of our other guests, Roger Manick, who was actually teaching empathy at Stanford. There's a need to actually learn empathy, which is kind of sad, because that's how we relate to each other. So again, we keep hearing this theme. There's this constant push towards becoming more people-centric, and some companies use that as a buzzword to relate themselves in terms of the future of work. But then there's those companies who are actually making the investments to help people pursue their growth as individuals, not just their growth as professionals. And I think there's opportunities for that beyond just mindfulness practices or yoga at the office and things of that sort that are really important and good. But, the mental health issue is a big problem today that's not getting enough attention, in my opinion. And the way people are in terms of their state of mind, how they feel about themselves, carries into how they perform at work, carries into how they show up everywhere else in their lives. So it would be in the best interest of everyone to invest in understanding, how do I help this individual become a better adjusted, human being, period. And so what are some of the things you think you've seen work, Kim, even here in Nearsoft? I know we're coming up on time here. Just want to share with the audience things we practice, because we practice every day here for the past 13 years. If you want to share something maybe that you want to share with other companies that are thinking about putting some of these things in practice, what do you think has worked for us?
I think what works is just the ability, number one, and we go back to this all the time too, is to trust. To trust that your employees, if they have a great idea, if they feel like they have a talent for something, and kind of this no harm, no foul stance, right? Like, go for it. Like, what's the worst that could happen? And I think that that's something that's really valuable. Even DojoLIVE itself, actually, our genesis is something very much in line with this idea of tapping into our own unique talents, right? Having this idea, and me even being here, Carlos Ponce was the first one right back at the beginning, like, hey Kim, why don't you co-host with me? It turns out I like it, and I think I'm sort of good at it, and to me it's something that I had never even thought that maybe I could do this. And I think that was really interesting. I mean, we even have our very own academy program where we tap into students and help teach them, teach and unteach certain elements to kind of thrive in our culture, and then opportunities to work with us afterward. Even this idea of our well-being program, like you touched on with mental health, some of that we are able to work with professionals exterior to Nearsoft, but a lot of our well-being initiatives come from within, right? We have, oh no, I'm gonna slaughter, is it my, Fernando, don't kill me. Mai Tai, that's not Mai Tai, that's the drink. What is it? There's this Brazilian martial arts that he practices and that he's invited people, and now they've got like a group, I think about 5-10 people who meet several times a week.
I think it's Camagra, I think, something like that.
Shoot, Fernando, I'm sorry. But I mean, that's an example of where you can tap into your own unique talents and help others, right? And I think it ultimately helps our company because people are happy to be here. There's a community here, there's a family here, and it creates a renewed sense of excitement and commitment, and this realization that I can thrive here, that people actually care about me. If I'm not thriving, I can reach out to someone. And
yeah, it really comes down to creating meaning and belonging. And we're up on time, so great recap. If anyone watching and wants to join us for the next recap, just let us know. We want to have audience participation. You can actually be one of the tiles right here talking about the show. And we're speaking of the show, we have another one coming up this Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific. Don't remember what the title is, but it's going to be interesting, so definitely show up.
Always interesting.
It's actually my birthday on the 19th on Wednesday, so I'm going to be showing up on my own birthday on DojoLIVE. So check us out.
Perfect. Talk to you later, Tulio.
Cheers.